Before I tell you how I took revenge on my wife and how I dealt with the walking misunderstanding, her lover, I would like to tell you about myself. My name is Mark Bennett, and my story, like so many others who wear the uniform, is one of pride, sacrifice, and transformation. Growing up, I idolized my father, a man of few words but strong convictions. He was a soldier through and through, and in my eyes, he was everything a man should be. He never spoke much about his experiences, but the stories he did share painted a picture of duty, sacrifice, and an unbreakable brotherhood. By the time I graduated high school, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Joining the Army wasn't just a choice, it was a calling. Training pushed me harder than I had ever been pushed before, but I thrived on it. I wasn't just there to serve. I wanted to be the best. I fought to earn my Ranger tab, endured the grueling tests, and when I finally made it through, the pride I felt was beyond words. I was part of something bigger than myself, a unit bonded by trust and a simple but powerful creed. Rangers lead the way. Deployment to Iraq was a test of everything I had trained for. The heat, the dust, the exhaustion. It became the backdrop of our daily reality. Missions blurred together, each one pushing us to our limits. There was no room for hesitation. We depended on each other to survive, and the bonds we forged in those moments were stronger than family. But war leaves its mark. One mission, one moment, and everything changed. The IED went off without warning. 1 second, I was moving forward, alert and focused. The next, I was on the ground, pain ripping through my body, my ears ringing so loudly that the world around me felt like it had collapsed into silence. I was lucky, if you could call it that. The injuries I sustained meant my days as a ranger were over, but I was alive. Some of my brothers weren't. And that's a kind of weight you never really put down. Leaving the Army was harder than I expected. I had spent years in a world where I knew exactly who I was and what I was supposed to do. Without it, I felt lost. The GI Bill became my path forward. I threw myself into my studies the same way I had thrown myself into Ranger training. Engineering caught my interest, something about solving problems, creating instead of destroying. It gave me purpose. College wasn't easy. I was older than my classmates, carrying experiences that set me apart in ways they couldn't understand. But I stuck with it, and over time, I found my stride. And then, I met Susan. It wasn't planned. It wasn't expected. I had walked into an auto dealership one afternoon looking for a used truck, something simple, reliable. She worked the front desk, and the moment I saw her, something about her just stood out. She had this natural warmth, a way of talking to people that made you feel like you mattered. I found excuses to come back, even when I didn't need anything. Before long, we were inseparable. We built a life together, solid, steady, something real. Then, not long after we got married, my father passed away. He left us his house, along with a $200,000 life insurance policy. With the house valued at another $300,000, our lives changed almost overnight. We moved into the house, making it our home. I had taken a job as a trainer for an auto manufacturer, traveling across the country to visit service centers and conduct training sessions. It meant more time on the road than I liked, but it was steady work. I thought we were happy. Then, one afternoon, everything unraveled. I had just come back from a work trip, driving through town when I spotted her car. At first, I thought nothing of it. She hadn't mentioned going out, but maybe she was just running errands. Then I saw where she pulled in. A motel parking lot. My grip tightened on the wheel. Something felt wrong. I slowed down, keeping my distance, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then, I saw him. A man stepped out of a nearby car. He walked toward her like he'd done it 100 times before. Like this wasn't the first time. Like she had been waiting for him. Together, they disappeared inside. I sat there, staring at the motel entrance, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands started to ache. A wave of anger, betrayal, and disbelief crashed over me all at once. My first instinct? Go in there. Confront them. Beat the guy to a pulp. But I knew where that would land me. In a jail cell. Alone. Watching my life fall apart even more than it already had. So I forced myself to stay put, to breathe, to hold back the storm building inside me. And in that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Susan wasn't being coerced. There was no hesitation in her movements, no nervous glances over her shoulder. No guilt, no fear, She was there by choice. That realization hit me harder than any punch I had ever taken. I should have left. Should have turned the car around and driven home, pretended I never saw it. But I couldn't. I needed to know more. I needed to understand how long this had been going on, why she was doing this, what it meant for the life we had built together. So I waited. The minutes stretched on, turning into an hour, then longer. The longer I sat there, the more my emotions twisted and knotted inside me. Disbelief warring with rage, heartbreak battling numbness. And then, the door opened. They walked out together, side by side, laughing like nothing in the world could touch them. And then I saw it. The kiss. Not a guilty, fleeting peck. Not a hesitant brush of lips. It was deep, slow, intimate. The kind of kiss I thought was meant for us. I felt my stomach turn. Everything inside me twisted like a knife had been driven through my gut. They finally pulled away, smiling at each other like this was routine. Like it wasn't a betrayal but just another part of their day. Then they went their separate ways, getting into their cars, driving off as if nothing had happened. I sat there, my hands locked in a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. My mind a storm of questions I didn't want to ask and scenarios I didn't want to believe. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my entire body felt wound-tight, like a spring ready to snap. I had told myself I would be ready to face her. But the moment I saw her standing there, I felt my stomach drop. She was exactly the same. No signs of guilt, no lingering hesitation. Dressed casually, effortlessly put together. She smiled when she saw me, eyes warm, familiar, as if everything was normal. "Hey, you're back," she said, stepping forward, pressing a soft kiss to my cheek. I stiffened but forced myself to stay calm. "It was fine," I answered flatly, my voice tight. "I just made coffee." "Want to join me?" she asked, motioning toward the kitchen. "Yeah, in a minute," I muttered. "Need to hit the bathroom first." I walked away quickly, pulse hammering in my ears. Inside the bathroom, I leaned against the sink, gripping the edge so hard my fingers ached. I needed to breathe. I needed to think. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted her laundry in the corner. Jeans. A blouse. Neatly folded. Too neat. Something made me pick them up. The scent hit me instantly. Not her perfume. Not the soft floral scent I knew. A man's cologne. Musky. Sharp. My stomach clenched, the final confirmation hitting like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't something I could explain away. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. Swallowing back the bile rising in my throat, I forced myself to change into fresh clothes. I had to keep it together, at least for now. By the time I walked into the kitchen, Susan was sitting at the table, sipping her coffee, posture relaxed, completely unaware that the world had shifted beneath my feet. I sat across from her, poured myself a cup, watching her. "So," I said, keeping my voice as even as possible, "what did you do today?" She glanced up, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Oh, you know, the usual. Ran some errands, got groceries, did a little work on the computer. Nothing too exciting." I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "That all?" I asked, my tone casual, but my hands tightening around the coffee cup. "Yeah," she answered, her brows knitting slightly in confusion. "Why?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. Cold. Unwavering. "You missed the part where you were at the Golden Drive motel with a blonde guy." The words landed like a hammer in the space between us. For the briefest moment, I saw something flash in her expression. Surprise, shock, maybe even fear. But it was gone almost instantly, replaced by a strange, eerie calm. "So, you saw me," she said flatly. "No guilt. No excuses." "Yeah," I confirmed, my voice hard as steel. "I saw you. I saw him. I saw what you did in that room." Susan didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't apologize. Instead, she exhaled like a burden had finally been lifted. "I knew you'd find out eventually." The sheer emptiness in her tone made my skin crawl. "That's it?" I snapped, incredulous. "That's all you have to say? You knew I'd find out, and you just, what? Don't even care?" She folded her hands on the table, eyes steady. "His name is Jason," she said, like she was introducing an old friend. "My ex-boyfriend." A wave of ice rushed through me. You can't get over him, I echoed bitterly. You married me, Susan. She didn't blink. We broke up when he left me for someone else, she said, her voice almost detached, as if telling a story that had nothing to do with us. But it's not romantic between us anymore. I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. Oh, right. So meeting at motels is just catching up over coffee? No. Her voice was firm, calm, almost unnervingly so. It's just sex. That's all it's ever been. Something inside me snapped. Just sex? I repeated, my voice low, bitter. You actually think that makes it better? She didn't hesitate. He's single, she added, as if that somehow justified it. He works as an electrician at the sawmill. I stared at her, numb, the words barely registering. She kept talking, like she needed me to understand, as if her reasoning would somehow make it okay. A year ago, when you were leaving for the airport, he called me. It was the first time I'd heard from him in years, she said, her voice steady, detached. I felt sick. He had a room at the motel, she continued, invited me over to talk. I scoffed. Talk? I snapped, my fists clenching. That what we're calling it now? She ignored my outburst, and I sat there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, realizing I had been living a lie. He asked about you, Susan said, stirring her coffee like we were discussing weekend plans. So, I told him how we met, fell in love, got married. For the first time, she hesitated. It was subtle, barely a flicker in her voice, but it was there. And then, we started having sex. My fists clenched under the table. How long? My voice was low, controlled, but laced with something dark. She met my gaze, no shame, no hesitation. A year, she said flatly. I felt something inside me fracture. A year? I echoed, the words like poison in my mouth. My voice rose, the fury breaking free. You've been screwing him for a year? She didn't flinch, didn't shrink back. As if that should matter, she said smoothly. I never gave you sloppy seconds, if that's what you're worried about. She sipped her coffee, her voice disturbingly casual. If you want, I'll even give you a BJ tonight. I stared at her, my brain unable to process the sheer audacity of what she just said. And I'll admit, she continued, completely oblivious to the rage burning inside me, I like how rough Jason is with me in bed. But he's no threat to us, I promise. No threat. No threat. Who the hell was this woman? I wasn't looking at Susan, my wife. I was looking at a stranger. A cold, detached woman who didn't care that she had just destroyed our marriage. You think this doesn't affect me? I asked, my voice like ice. She tilted her head, watching me with mild curiosity, like she was studying an insect under glass. I won't live with a cheater, I said finally. I'll sleep in the spare room tonight and tomorrow. I'm seeing an attorney. Susan leaned back, crossing her legs. A smirk played on her lips. Let me explain what'll happen if you file for divorce, she said, voice smooth as silk. I froze. This is a no-fault state, she continued, which means you'll be forced to sell this house and split the money with me. Her eyes gleamed as she added, Your father gave you this house, didn't he? My fists curled under the table. And the $200,000 in the bank? She went on. Half of that's mine too. The nerve of this woman. And since I don't work, she said, tilting her head mockingly, you'll be paying me alimony. Might even get half of your salary. She leaned in, voice lowering to something sickeningly sweet. What I do with Jason right now, that's not hurting you. My blood boiled. But after the divorce? Her lips curled into a wicked smile. Then you'll be paying me while I keep screwing Jason. She let the words sink in, enjoying the way my face hardened. It's a win-win for me, Mark, she whispered, and all loss for you. So, think long and hard before you make a big mistake. I stood without a word, rage clawing at my chest. Susan barely even looked at me as I walked away. As I moved through the house, I heard her humming to herself, like nothing had happened. I grabbed some clothes, shoved them into a bag, and shut the door to the spare bedroom with a firm click. Then, I locked it. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning. Sleep wasn't an option. Then I heard her voice. Low, but clear. She was on the phone. Yeah, Jenny. He found out, she said, laughing softly. Laughing. He was all serious and hurt, she continued. Like, what did he expect? My jaw tightened. Jason's just better in bed, she added lightly. Jenny knew. She had sat at our dinner table, smiling at me, pretending to be my friend, all while knowing. I turned over, fuming. Not once, had Susan apologized. She hadn't even pretended to be sorry. Her solution? For me to keep funding her life while she kept screwing him. If I stayed, if I accepted this, if I let her get away with it, I'd be a cuck. That word burned through my brain like acid. No, not going to happen. By dawn, my decision was made. I grabbed my keys and drove to McDonald's, needing space, needing to think. The greasy breakfast sat heavy in my stomach, but at least it wasn't empty. By 9 a.m., I was at work, sitting at my desk, staring at the phone. My thumb hovered over the keypad. Then, without hesitation, I made the call. An attorney's office. I need an appointment today, I said, my voice flat. The receptionist gave me the earliest slot, 1 p.m. Hanging up, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Susan had been right. Sitting in the attorney's office, I already knew what he was going to say. In this state, he explained, his expression sympathetic but firm, marital assets are split evenly, and since your wife doesn't work, you'll likely be paying alimony. I clenched my jaw. And the infidelity? I asked. He shook his head. It's a no-fault state. It won't matter in court. I barely heard the rest. The numbers, the legal jargon, the cold reality of what Susan had smugly laid out for me. When I walked out of that office, it wasn't just anger burning in my gut. It was certainty. Back at work, I sat at my desk, staring blankly at my screen. I couldn't focus. I needed a plan. And then, it hit me. A way to get Susan out of my life without losing everything. It wasn't perfect. It would cost me, but it would be worth it. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and headed for my boss's office. He glanced up as I walked in, concern flickering in his eyes. You sure about this, Mark? He asked. You've been solid here for 5 years. Hate to see you go. I forced a steady nod, even though my chest felt like it was caving in. I appreciate that, sir, I said. But I need to handle some personal things. It's not something I can balance with work. He exhaled heavily, nodding. Divorce is rough. Seen a few guys go through it. Minutes later, I was handed my last paycheck, in cash. The office assistant processed my 401k withdrawal. 5 years of effort boiled down to a pitiful sum, but it was something. Take care, Mark, my boss said, clapping my shoulder. You'll land on your feet. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. Thanks for everything, I muttered before walking out. Next stop, the bank. I strode in with purpose, trying to steady my breathing. How can I help you today? The teller asked politely. I need to withdraw from my savings, I said, sliding my ID across the counter. The full balance. Her eyebrows lifted. That's a substantial amount, sir. Are you sure? I'm sure. After verification, she handed me the withdrawal slip. Minutes later, I had $200,000 in neatly stacked bills. Susan would never know. The account had always been in my name, untouched since I started saving. The next morning, I made another move. I walked into the mortgage office, knowing exactly what I was about to do. I need a $300,000 loan on my property, I told the banker. She eyed me but nodded. Let's see what you qualify for. The paperwork was tedious, but by the time I left, the loan was secured. Since the house was solely under my name, Susan didn't have to be notified. She would never know. Control. That was what I felt as I drove home, my fingers gripping the steering wheel. Every step was calculated, every move precise. Inside the house, Susan went about her usual routine, oblivious to what I was doing. I had been living in the spare room for days, locking the door at night, shutting myself off from her completely. She thought I was sulking. She had no idea. Then, I made a call. A name I hadn't said in years. Javier Mendez. We had served together in the army. We had been in the same IED explosion in Iraq. It had left scars on both of us, some visible, some buried deep. I got out. Javier didn't. His path had led him into a different life. Organized crime, drug trafficking, jobs that made men fear him. I never saw him as a criminal back then, but that's who he had become. That night, I walked into the kind of bar you don't go to unless you're looking for something. It smelled of stale beer and bad decisions. Javier's men were everywhere, their sharp eyes tracking every single person who walked through the door. I moved through the haze of cigarette smoke, my pulse pounding in my chest. And then, I saw him, sitting in the corner. Older, harder, but still the man I remembered from those days in the desert. His gaze locked onto me instantly. His men stepped forward, alert, until he waved them off with a single motion. Then, he stood, arms wide. Before I could react, he pulled me into a tight hug. "Mark," he boomed, his voice just as I remembered. "It's been too damn long, man." I exhaled slowly, my heart hammering. Then, I told him everything. The anger I had been bottling up spilled out, raw and unfiltered, as I told Javier everything. How Susan had been sneaking around with Jason, some guy from the local mill. How she had laughed in my face, admitting it like it was nothing. How she expected me to fund her lifestyle while she kept screwing him. I could feel the weight of my words in the air, the shift in Javier's demeanor as I spoke. A dangerous line was being crossed, and I knew it. But I didn't care. Javier didn't say a word at first. He just listened, his face unreadable, his fingers idly tapping the table. Then, after a long pause, he raised a hand. "Say no more," he said, his voice calm but firm. He took a slow drag of his cigarette, exhaled, and then, without a hint of hesitation, set the date. "This Friday. I'll take care of things." A chill ran down my spine, but I kept my expression neutral. "What will you do to him?" I asked, though I already had a sick feeling in my gut. Javier smiled. A slow, knowing grin. "I'll let him decide his fate," he said simply, as if he was savoring the thought. I swallowed hard. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't argue. Javier wasn't someone you questioned. Leaning back in his chair, he flicked the ash from his cigarette and finally spoke again. "So, where are you headed next?" I hesitated. I hadn't thought that far ahead. "I don't know yet," I admitted. Javier nodded like he expected that answer. Then, pulling out his phone, he made a few quick calls, his voice low and sharp. When he hung up, his gaze locked onto mine. "Thursday. You're boarding a flight to Mexico." I blinked. "What?" "You'll pick up a new passport at the airport," he explained. "I got a guy who'll set you up with everything, a fresh start, clean slate. But it'll cost you." I didn't even ask how much. 50 grand, he said, watching me carefully. "I'll cover the officials and the tickets, but you pay up front." I reached into my jacket, pulled out the cash, and handed it over without hesitation. Javier thumbed through it quickly before tucking it away. "You're set," he said with a nod. "Get to the airport Thursday. The rest is handled." I stood, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. This was it, a point of no return. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Javier smirked. "Don't thank me yet, Mark." His gaze darkened slightly. "We'll see how things go." I turned and walked out, stepping back into the world I was about to leave behind. I woke to soft morning light filtering through the windows. My body felt heavy, like it knew today was the day I had to face Susan. She was already sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, waiting, like she had known this moment was coming. There was no way out now. Keeping my expression neutral, I made myself coffee, taking slow, deliberate movements to keep my anger in check. When I sat down across from her, her eyes lingered on me, expectant, waiting for something. An apology? An explanation? A reaction? "You didn't make me a cup," she said lightly, almost playfully, like we were having a normal conversation. I smiled, but it wasn't a kind one. "There are a lot of things you did without me," I said. "Might as well start getting used to it." Her eyes flickered. She leaned forward, her voice softer, more serious now. "I told you, Jason and I aren't taking anything away from you," she said smoothly. "I'm still your wife." I stared at her. "You always wanted a family, right?" she continued. "When the time comes, I'll make sure only you become the father. I'll give you everything you want." Unbelievable. This was how she justified it. Like it was some side hobby that shouldn't affect us. But it did. It ruined everything. I leaned back, studying her for a moment, my voice quiet but sharp. "I want a faithful wife," I said. "Can you give me that?" She sighed. already bored with this conversation. Come on, Mark, don't be stubborn. I love only you. I laughed coldly. Oh, right. You just like screwing someone else? She rolled her eyes. Jason is just a way to satisfy some certain desires. I cut her off. Desires your husband can't fulfill? She gave me a look, like I was being dramatic. It's not like that, she said. You're gentle. He's rough. It's just different. I felt something boil inside me, but I forced my voice to stay steady. So you like being used like a street hooker? I asked. You should have told me earlier. I could have made some money off it. Her face flushed red, her lips parting in shock. Shut up, Mark, she snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. I tilted my head. I mean, you were getting screwed by men in cheap motels, I said. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her anger was almost amusing, because now it was her who couldn't handle the truth. Hookers do that all the time, I said coldly, leaning back in my chair. You have Jason now. Maybe in a few months, it'll be Chad, then Tyrone, then someone else. Maybe you'll wake up one day and decide you want something different, something new to satisfy whatever it is you're chasing. Susan's expression darkened, but I didn't stop. You're still young, I continued, my voice sharp. 4, maybe 5 more years before time catches up with you. Men will pay good money for that. Then they'll move on to someone younger, someone fresher. Might as well start now if you want to make a career out of it. Venom dripped from every word. She pushed back from the table, eyes flashing with frustration. Don't blame me when I wreck you in court, she hissed. I smirked, finishing the last sip of my coffee. I wish you all the best, I said simply. I won't blame you for anything. I stood, pausing only for a moment. Before I leave for the day, I just want you to know something. I used to love you. I used to think I was the luckiest man alive. I used to believe we were meant for each other. I met her eyes, my voice steady, final. But, Susan, the problem is, I used to. You made sure of that. And with that, I walked out the door. That night, I came back to find a note waiting for me on the kitchen table. The moment I saw Susan's handwriting, my stomach twisted, but I forced myself to read. Since you were so disrespectful this morning, I decided to spend the night with Jason. If you have a problem with it, to hell with you. This arrangement will continue whether you like it or not. If you want to divorce me, be my guest. Your loving wife, Susan. I stared at the mocking signature, my grip tightening on the paper. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was rubbing my face in it. She thought she had control, that she could break me. But all she did was show how far she had fallen. If you have a problem with it, to hell with you. She didn't even care. She was too far gone to even see how this would end, for either of us. By the time the sun started to rise, I was done. I called a cab. My car had already been sold. By the time Susan returned, she'd find nothing but an empty house. No car in the driveway. No sign of me. No clue where I had gone. No way to follow me. The cab ride to the airport felt surreal, like I was waking up from a nightmare. Stepping out, I looked up at the terminal, a strange peace settling over me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this chapter was over. Susan had made her choice. Now, she would never know what happened, or how. The flight to Mexico felt like a blur. When I landed, everything moved too fast, too surreal. I followed the instructions I had been given, my steps feeling too rehearsed, too final. At immigration, a silent man was waiting for me. He didn't say much, just motioned for me to follow him into the men's restroom. Inside, he handed me a new passport. No questions asked. No hesitation. I glanced at the name. Alistair. That was who I was now. Along with the passport, he handed me a plane ticket to Thailand and a small file. All the best, he said before turning to leave. Then, he paused, giving me a knowing look. You'll meet Bunya outside the airport. He'll take care of you. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. I was already too far gone to turn back. The flight to Bangkok was long, the hours stretching endlessly. I barely slept. Too many thoughts. Too many memories. When I landed, my body ached, exhaustion creeping into every limb. Then I saw him. A round, chubby man waiting with a grin. Alistair? He asked in broken English, his voice warm, his handshake firm. Yeah, I said, shaking his hand. Bunya chuckled. Good. Come. I take you to hotel. We got into a cab, the lights of the city blurring past. The hotel wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. Tomorrow, Bunya said, his smile easy, reassuring, I find you house. I nodded, grateful. Thanks. I appreciate it. The next morning, Bunya kept his word. We drove out to a small house near the beach. Simple, quiet. A place that felt like a fresh start. I knew immediately. This is it, I said. Bunya grinned. You buy. I didn't need to think twice. Yeah, I said. I'll take it. By the afternoon, it was mine. It all happened so fast, too fast. But I didn't question it. This was my new life now. Inside the file, I found everything I needed. My qualifications, a new name, a new past. Alistair Williams. That was who I was now. That afternoon, Bunya helped me find work. A head trainer at an automobile company. It wasn't what I was used to, but it paid well and I didn't care. It was a start. As I stood in front of the small house, looking out at the ocean, everything made sense. Javier had been right. He had promised me a new life. And now, I was living it. I had settled into my new life, a world away from the wreckage Susan had created. 2 days in, my phone rang. The moment I saw Javier's name, a chill ran through me. I knew what this was about. I answered, keeping my voice even. Yeah. Alistair, Javier's voice came through, calm and steady. You wanted to know what happened to Loverboy? I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding against my ribs. Yeah, I said. You took care of it, right? A pause. In the background, I could hear faint movement, muffled voices. He's gone, Javier said finally. My boys took him across the border. You weren't the only one who wanted him gone. I gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean? 2 other husbands, Javier said. They wanted him dealt with, too. So we made sure he wouldn't be a problem anymore. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What happened? Javier's voice was cold, detached. They beat him, he said. Made sure he knew why. Then they gave him a choice, 2 bottles. I felt my stomach tighten. 1 vodka, 1 water. They looked the same. I exhaled slowly. He didn't know? Javier sighed. No, he never knew. A silence stretched between us. He picked the vodka, Javier continued. Then they dropped him in the Sonoran Desert, 110-degree heat, 100 miles from the nearest town. No food, no water. A pit formed in my stomach. Jesus, I muttered. Javier's voice softened slightly. His body was found this morning, stomach full of vodka. He didn't make it. I sat there, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't know what I should feel. Relief? Closure? Or something else? Thanks, I said, my voice tight. Javier was quiet for a moment before speaking again. Don't forget why you're here, Alistair. They pushed you out. Don't feel bad for them. I didn't respond right away, because no matter what he said, I couldn't shake the image of Jason in that desert. Alone, sun beating down, stomach burning from the vodka, sweat drying too fast to save him. Damn, that was a nightmare I wouldn't wish on anyone. I hadn't thought much about Susan after I left. Not really, but I knew the moment she would realize what I had done. And when she did, I almost wished I could see her face. She probably woke up that morning expecting things to go on as usual. Maybe she thought I was off sulking somewhere, licking my wounds like a wounded dog, waiting for the moment I'd crawl back, begging for another chance. Maybe she even laughed about it. But then, she needed money. She grabbed my ATM card, the one I had once given her for emergencies. A safety net. She slid it into the ATM. Declined. She frowned. Tried again. Same result. I could almost picture her frustration turning to panic. She drove straight to the bank, storming inside, demanding answers. She probably didn't expect the look on the manager's face when he saw her. Is there a problem with my card? She might have asked, keeping her tone polite at first, though I knew she was fuming inside. The manager checked the system, pausing for just a moment too long before looking up. I'm afraid the account is empty, ma'am, he said. That was the moment her stomach dropped. What? She probably stammered. That's impossible. He nodded, his voice calm, measured. The funds were withdrawn in full. Her breath caught. When? 4 days ago. The day I disappeared. She must have stood there, trying to process what that meant. And then, The final blow. She clung to one last hope, the house. She probably squared her shoulders, tried to sound confident. "That's fine," she might have said, forcing a tight smile. "We still have the house." But the manager's expression didn't change. "You took out the full mortgage amount, ma'am." Her blood probably ran cold. "What?" His voice softened slightly. "Your husband took out the full loan. The house is mortgaged." That was it. That was the moment she realized she had lost everything. Not just me. Not just Jason. The house. The money. The security. Everything. I was gone. And Susan? She was standing in the wreckage of what she had built. All alone. I had found my rhythm again. The days were simple. Work hard. Train kickboxing in the evenings. It was a hell of a way to forget the pain that had built up inside me. Then, one night, the phone rang. "Javier." I answered. "Alistair, I got some news for you," he said. His tone was different this time. I braced myself. Javier didn't call for small talk. "Susan's gone," he said flatly. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't respond. "The cops found her this morning," Javier continued. "Overdosed. Some say it was on purpose." I stopped breathing. For a long moment, I just sat there, unable to speak. A cold tear traced down my cheek before I could stop it. It was strange. Part of me wanted to feel relief. But there was something else, something I couldn't shake. Javier's voice softened. "They cremated her. No one was there to claim the body." Silence. I swallowed, trying to process the words. Just like that, she was gone. No final conversation. No closure. Just gone. "Stay strong, brother," Javier said. But I didn't respond. I just sat there, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of something that would never make sense. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. What if things had been different? What if Susan had been open with me? What if she had been honest? But there were no more what-ifs. No more regrets. No more looking back. Everything had ended. James didn't exist anymore. I was Alistair now, and I would live. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you soon.